This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Kate Watson.
And I'm Claire Kimball.
The biggest story this week, Claire, is a long-awaited reunion.
Don't look back in anger, Kate.
What a hint. What a hint. And then our government announced a big policing agreement with our Pacific friends this week. We also saw protests in our major cities by union workers and a big international story, the arrest of the founder of Telegram.
Yeah, it's a very big social media app. You might not have heard of it, so we'll go into that. Coming up, the AFL will likely dominate the news ahead of the start of the finals next week.
And our recommendations are a good way to keep up with what's going on in the Middle East. Let's do it. Before we get into the news, a message from BHP. Copper is a big deal in the energy transition because it's used to make electric vehicles, wind turbines and solar panels. When it comes to producing copper responsibly, it's happening now at BHP. Claire, if we had a bit more time in our production process, we'd have introed this segment about the biggest story of the week with the opening riff from Wonderwall. I reckon, would we have?
It's pretty recognisable. It's a nice intro, bit of music, I think.
It's a great song.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone that doesn't like that song. It's incredibly popular, and it's Oasis, the band that wrote and sings that song. They announced they will be reuniting this week. It was everywhere.
Absolutely everywhere. It's been one of those interesting intergenerational moments, I think, this week. We certainly had younger members of our team who were like, what the hell is that all about? Like, a bit bemused that it had sort of taken over the news. For us Gen Xers who were in their late teens and 20s when they were at their peak in the 90s and into the early 2000s, it's certainly a thing.
Oh, and for millennials.
Yeah.
I mean, for millennials, I think that's like the smack bang in the middle of it. Were you into Oasis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had their 3 big studio releases. That was on CD. You used to pop them on.
Yep.
If you were really cool, you had a CD player in your car as well.
I think, until recently, one of my cars still had a CD player. That was weird.
Well, mine still does.
Yeah, yours would actually, yeah.
Date how interested I am in turning over my car. But look, it was absolutely a moment in time. There were huge changes afoot in the United Kingdom. So it wasn't just about a couple of good bands. Everything seemed to change in the United Kingdom at that moment in time, and Oasis was certainly a bit of a soundtrack to that. Politically, Tony Blair and Labor, they won after 17 years of Conservative rule in the United Kingdom. That went all the way back to Margaret Thatcher. So it was a real turning of the page. It was called Cool Britannia. Spice Girls, Blur, The Verve, so many more huge bands that made it internationally. It was this real wave of change, and you could absolutely feel that here in Australia too.
Yeah, the age I am, I kind of caught the tail end of it, but understood immediately just what a big deal this reunion is. They soared to the highest of highs, Oasis, and then it all went a bit pear-shaped or very pear-shaped.
It went very pear-shaped. So for the benefit of those listening who don't understand this backstory and might give you the context as to why it's been such a big thing this week, the band is led by brothers Liam and Noel Gallagher. Liam's the main singer, Noel's the main songwriter, although he can sing pretty well too. They had their moments over the years as brothers, and it was in 2009 that it all busted up. That happened just before they were going on stage at a big festival in Paris. They split up and they didn't go on stage, and that was it. Afterwards, Noel said, I simply could not go on working with Liam a day longer. He just had enough. And then he also said, it was actually an argument that he'd had with Liam backstage. It blew up and he grabbed his guitar and swung it around like an axe.
So that's said to have been like the breaking point after tension for a really long time. If you Google Oasis, you'll get results like Liam and Noel's top 10 fights kind of thing. It was a whole thing. The pattern was Liam doing something dumb to annoy Noel, one of them hitting each other. When Noel asked about Liam's issues, he delivered the famous line. He said his brother was the angriest man you'll ever meet. He's like a man with a fork in a world of soup. It's a great line.
Which would be really frustrating.
Right, that would be really frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, it would make you very mad. So they split in 2009. It's been 15 years. So this week, Oasis Live 25 has been announced. They're starting with 16 shows in the UK and Ireland. That's going to be in July and August next year. Maybe some more shows in Europe and beyond that. Still to be announced.
Yeah, there's no guarantee of an Australian tour for people wondering. The band strongly suggested a bigger tour, though, could be on the cards. Reading about the ticket sales process, it kind of, for anyone who experienced the Taylor Swift phenomenon and the inability to get tickets, it feels a bit like that.
Yeah, so you pre-register to get pre-sales and then maybe you get a chance at general admission. Millions of people have already put up their hand to say that they want to do it. So ticket prices and all of that is a big talking point, particularly in the United Kingdom, and that process to get your hands on those tickets. But the one thing we do know, it's going to be lucrative for the brothers. They're playing big venues like Wembley, just like Swift did, and not just once, but for several shows. There's millions of dollars in this for them.
I did see a headline that said that they could potentially make more from this tour than they ever made in the 90s.
Incredible.
Don't know how true that is, but that was the headline. As for why they're doing it, they haven't said exactly. So much you can read about this, some speculating that one motivation for the reunion, and to the point about it being particularly lucrative, is that Noel has recently been divorced from his second wife, Sarah McDonald, in a settlement reported to cost tens of millions of dollars. Maybe it's just for the fans.
Maybe it's just for the fans. Maybe. We'll wait and see. There's a bit of reporting this week that their mum, Peggy, hasn't been well. So a reunion is about sort of resolving those family differences and moving on and giving her a sense of peace. Kate, one thing I've noted this week too is the use of social media. It's just everywhere.
They're everywhere. They have a look, a very distinct look. So it's hard to miss them if they pop up in your feed. They're very cool. They're also in their 50s now.
And nothing cooler than blokes in their 50s popping up on TikTok and Instagram Reels. So.
I think they're still very, very cool. And I mean, the amount of money they're about to make makes them even cooler,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely.
I guess we'll finish by saying it's a year until these concerts happen. So let's hope they stick the landing, Claire. 3 other stories from the week. Let's start in Tonga with PIF, the Pacific Islands Forum. We foreshadowed that was taking place this week in last week's podcast. Probably the biggest story from there was Prime Minister Anthony Albanese talking casually with Kurt Campbell. He's the US Deputy Secretary of State.
Yeah, it's funny how those off-script moments really do tend to take over the news. They really cut through. We can dive in at that point because it does lead us to the biggest thing from PIF for Australia. It was an agreement on a Pacific policing initiative.
We'll come back to Kurt, but let's get across that first. So the reason that agreement is necessary is that the Pacific has a real need for policing cooperation. It has problems with organised crime. Many nations just don't have the capacity to train and maintain their own security forces.
Yeah, so the idea is this initiative will see up to 4 police training centres of excellence. They'll be established across the Pacific. Australia will provide $400 million in funding for that over 5 years. It's mainly infrastructure costs to get that off the ground. There's going to be a police development and coordination hub as well in Brisbane. That will give Pacific police officers from across those nations, they'll get access to Australian federal police facilities and training, and they'll be able to prepare for deployments.
And I guess just to be clear, it's not a Pacific police force. It's actually just the training infrastructure to make sure that they can maintain their own forces. But there'll be lots of coordination and cooperation. I feel like the word cooperation has been
Cooperation,
done
coordination, collaboration, all of the C's. So it wasn't an easy agreement though, even though it's pretty clear about what this thing is going to be. The point of friction was not so much the police force itself, but about concerns that Pacific nations have had about the way Australia has led it, and that it might be sort of tacit to Australia trying to bolster our own strategic interests in the region to the exclusion of China.
Yeah, so for example, China's done policing deals with the Solomons, with Kiribati. Our view, Australia's view, is the Pacific should police the Pacific, not China. And for those who agree, I mean, you saw Anthony Albanese standing with James Marape of Papua New Guinea and also the leader of Fiji. They're very much behind this.
And we know that Port Moresby is going to have one of those sites, have one of those training hubs. So, Kate, that leads us neatly back to Albanese's chat with Kurt Campbell.
Yeah, so get us back to Kurt. So on Wednesday night, Radio New Zealand journalist Lydia Lewis filmed the pair discussing the plan on the sidelines of PIF.
Having a chat.
The American said the US had been contemplating a similar initiative until Australia's ambassador to the US, Kevin Rudd, asked them not to.
And that led Albanese to joke with Campbell, you can still go as Harveys. So Harveys being, you can chuck up.
Halvesies?
Halvesies.
Harveys?
Halvesies.
Oh, just half. Just go half.
Halvesies.
Yeah.
Go halves.
Yeah.
200 mil if you want to stump it up, go for your life.
It was very much a joke. And on the face of it, you might think, fine, we were like, they were just kidding. But for Pacific Island nations, it's important that those Pacific nations are looking after their own interests. So there's an issue of US interference that was pulled into question. I guess the second part of this is about the journalist filming a private conversation. I feel like this is a bit inside baseball.
Yeah, and it was really the focus of the media
of course.
Coverage of it, as tends to happen.
Yeah.
Media discussing their own sort of bits and pieces about how it actually came to be that this came to light. So what Albanese said, he also focused on it, taking issue. Maybe it was a deflection, maybe it was what actually really, really concerned him. He said that the journalist should look into her own ethics about taping a private conversation and publishing that she shouldn't have been filming private conversations. He said that anyone trying to read more into the conversation must be really bored.
And that brought us to the end of the week.
Yeah.
Moving on, I said to you this week it's hard not to talk about the CFMEU because if you were casually browsing the news, you would have seen a fair bit about them this week. They are the Construction, Forestry and Maritime Employees Union. Cities around the country saw tens of thousands of people march in protest against the forced administration of the construction arm of the union this week. It was lots of people.
Lots of people. So on Tuesday, if you were in Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane, Cairns, Canberra or Perth, you might have run into that. And it wasn't just CFMEU members in that protest either. It was the Manufacturing Workers Union, the Electrical Trades Union, also the Plumbers Union. Probably the other thing to note about it wasn't just the protest. They also downed tools for the day on building sites across the country.
Yeah, so the reason for the protest was legislation that's being passed through the Parliament last week?
Yep.
Was that last week?
Yeah.
Which forced the union into administration. It saw the removal of 270 union officers from their positions, which are mostly volunteer positions, and a further 11 from their paid jobs. It's essentially designed as a clean out to end corruption in the building industry.
Yeah, certainly that's the theory anyway. It's a huge job now for the government-appointed administrator to see that happen. That guy is a guy named Mark Irving. He's a barrister from Victoria. He's spoken up a bit this week about the job that's in front of him. What he says is that he'll take a zero-tolerance approach to corruption. He says the involvement of organised crime and criminal elements in the union won't be tolerated.
It all blew up, I feel like it was 3-4 weeks ago when there were those,
a little bit longer,
even maybe a bit longer,
yeah.
Those big allegations that ran in Nine's papers and on 60 Minutes that the CFMEU had bikies and organised crime figures running the show in Victoria. We talked about it at the time. Victorian Secretary John Setcove resigned. The government's response was to clean out the construction arm, as I said. But it has a whole lot of people up in arms.
Yeah, because they did it not just in Victoria where those allegations were isolated. They did it across the country, put the whole of that arm of the union into administration. Kate, construction's very important to our economy, so it's one to keep on your news radar.
Absolutely, particularly if these strikes are ongoing. Let's finish up by talking about Telegram and its founder being arrested this week in France.
Yeah, big global story across the week. It really bubbled up on Sunday, but it just continued. So it's worth spending a moment on. Telegram is a really interesting thing because it's relatively unknown in the West. It's super popular, though, in other parts of the world. It's sort of like WhatsApp, but it's got these broadcasting capabilities as well. It's encrypted and it started in Russia.
Pavel Durov is the founder. He is the guy who was arrested. He's Russian-born, but he's a French citizen. I think he's also a citizen of the UAE as well. What he's accused of is that his platform is being used for child sex abuse material and drug trafficking, and that Telegram has refused to share information or documents with investigators when required by law. What Durov says, though, is that he's a champion of free speech.
Kind of feel like we've seen this movie before.
Tech giants v free speech.
Yeah, exactly
it's very much in that category.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? So his supporters include Elon Musk, for example, who is taking a very similar line when it comes to his administration of X and what its platform is there to do. Interesting to read that the comparison. So Meta employs 40,000 people in safety and security in that arm of that company. Telegram is said to have a staff of 50 in total.
I read 50. I also read 110, but not many people work there.
Not compared to 40,000 that Meta has in security.
Yeah.
It's a very different scale. It's a very interesting one when it comes to how they might actually move to monitor the app.
How they are able to do that with such few staff. It has more than 950 million users, and Durov is said to be worth about $9 billion. Where this one gets really complex, I guess, is that Telegram is used a lot in Russia. In 2018, Russia did try to ban the app. They lifted all restrictions on the platform, though in 2020, after Russian authorities stated that Durov is willing to cooperate in fighting terrorism and extremism. It's said to be an app that the Russian military uses as well now.
Yeah, and I remember certainly at the start of the Ukraine war that Ukraine was using it as well. But yeah, various people around the world use it for different purposes. Some people are wondering if all governments really have an interest in what's on Telegram at the moment. It's not just isolated to a couple of countries. The Russian government's interested because they want to know what's being said. Western governments also might be interested to see what the Russian military is planning if their use of it's extensive.
Yeah, all of that is speculation, but that is where the conversation is certainly at the moment. A message now from BHP. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the production of copper is critical. That's why BHP has committed to a wind and battery agreement to help power their copper mine at Olympic Dam in South Australia. It's happening now at BHP. Visit bhp.com/coppercritical to find out more. At The Squiz, we're interested in growing podcast listening in general because the more people listening to podcasts, the better for us, which is why we're working with Mamamia over the next little while to highlight some of their podcasts. And they're going to do the same for us. To that end, if you haven't already come across it, we might point you to No Filter. It's Mia Friedman's interview show where she unearths some riveting stories you've never heard before. People open up to her in the most surprising ways. Search for No Filter wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up this week, Claire, as we are speaking, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz's first interview is about to air. That was with CNN. The reason this is in what's coming up is you can expect plenty of coverage of it across the weekend.
You certainly can, and that's in the lead up to this first debate on the 10th of September. There's a bit to unpack with all of that, why the interview is getting such a preview. So Harris has been copping a lot of flack from a lot of areas of the media because she hasn't held a press conference, certainly since Tim Walz has been appointed her running mate, and they haven't done an interview since Biden has been sort of pushed out of the picture. So the interview is a really big step towards addressing that criticism from the media.
What's happening with the debates? They're 10th of September, but Trump's like, oh, maybe I won't.
Oh, look, it's no different to the campaigns Trump has had before. As they get closer and closer to those dates, he likes to seed a little bit of uncertainty and a bit of chaos into the mix. So, yeah, all of that is playing out again. Certainly as far as we know, 10 September, it's going to be on ABC News. I won't say what I usually say again. It's on ABC News, not the Australian one. And, yeah, lots of questions about how that will actually play out.
Yeah, Sunday tomorrow is the first day of spring. It's National Wattle Day.
Yes.
My favourite flower.
I only learned that this week.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Now I won't buy you flowers again and just pull up on the side of the road and
they're not great
get my secateurs out.
Well, yeah. They're not great for displaying. It's a bit messy. But they are, it's such a signal of
beautiful.
The start of a beautiful time of year here in Australia. So
sorry if you're hay fevery and that's not your thing, but they are lovely to
beautiful.
Look at. Yeah.
It's also Father's Day.
Father's Day. That came around quickly.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. Anyway, Paralympics, they continue. We've got one gold as we record this. So exciting.
A Gallagher.
A Gallagher. We get to talk about a Gallagher again.
Yeah.
Wonder if he's a distant relative of the Oasis people from Manchester.
I have no idea.
But this is Thomas Gallagher. He's won the 50 metres S10 in the pool. So hopefully the start of many more to come.
Yeah, as we get into the rest of the week, it's the start of the AFL finals, as we flagged at the top. They kick off with the first qualifying final between Port Adelaide and Geelong on Thursday. Just so you can participate in your finals chat, a quick run through of who else has made the finals. The Sydney Swans took out the minor premiership, so they are in. They've had that minor premiership stitched up for weeks now.
It's sort of a fait accompli, and you and I can lay claim to starting their very good season. We went to the first Swans game of season 2024.
We did, and it was all because of us.
Oh, no, I agree.
They had such a great season.
I hear you.
We haven't been to a game since.
The
Greater Western Sydney are also in the finals. Western Bulldogs, Hawthorn, the Brisbane Lions and Carlton rounded out. Come on, Swannies.
Oh, go Swannies. Absolutely.
Squiz recommends a bit serious from us this week.
Yeah.
The Four Corners episode it was called The Big War, but it was very focused on Iran.
Very focused on Iran, and rightly so, because it's an unpicking really of how Iran is supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, when you look across the Houthis in Yemen, and exactly how that is playing out. And I think the reason I enjoyed it, John Lyons did that one, so an Australian journalist. It's not like a syndicated program that Four Corners has brought in. It has that sort of local element of explaining to Australians what it's all about. I think I understood that Iran, of course, is a huge power. I don't think I quite appreciated just how well-resourced they are.
That was the takeout for me, but also he was there. So he went to Iran, and the whole program is done from there. He's got some quite significant interviews, some different perspectives, and just that visual of actually seeing what life is like there and his experience even of trying to report from there.
And the visual too of going to that border of Israel and Lebanon. So you can actually see these things, how those people live their lives with that threat right on their doorstep.
Yeah, as I said, a very serious one. But if you're into getting across that is probably something to watch. And, it'll be relevant for a while. So it's not, you don't have to do it tonight.
Yeah.
You can watch it in the coming weeks.
Yes.
And then I like that you've pulled this out, Zan Rowe Take 5 with Noel Gallagher, because of course.
Like get familiar. And it's a lovely format. We've talked about Take 5 before. It's a great show that Zan does. The podcast version is there too, and it's a lot longer. But the TV show of it, you'll get the real the Noel vibe. Like he's quite thoughtful and he's not the sort of hothead that Liam is, but he has a couple of songs that are his favourites that he talks about parts of his life that I have as personal favourites as well.
So which one?
Particularly the Burt Bacharach.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not like
This Guy's in Love with You. It's a whole it's beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. There you go.
Not what you would expect necessarily.
Okay. All those recommendations are in your episode notes as always. Squiz Press, just a reminder that our Newsmakers interview with Lee Sales is out as we speak. I think a lot of people listening to this have actually listened to it already because we've had a lot of lovely feedback and the listens have been really strong.
Yeah, they have. And you did a great job.
Oh,
Lee did a great
Lee
job.
Sales.
I know.
I mean, how can you do a bad job?
Well, I'm sure you could. Not you personally. I'm sure someone could. However, no, it's a really good listen and it's a really good insight, I think, into her transition out of that news role, like 7:30, and into what's next for her.
Yeah, I thought also I asked her what she thought the most overlooked news story is. Her answer to that was very thoughtful. Then you have to listen to the interview to find out what she said. But we thought that would be our last episode. But Dr. Carl, his people emailed asking if we'd like him to come on the show, and we thought that would be an excellent thing to do. So we've got one more out. Hopefully we'll get that out next week for you, depending on how the timing goes. But the enthusiasm for Dr. Carl at the Squiz office was like something else.
Again, talking about these sort of generational blowbacks, it's kind of like, oh, okay, Dr. Carl.
Yeah.
He was such a huge thing growing up. around Triple J and, you know, the love with Will Anderson and Charlie Pickering and that whole crew.
Do you know what? I actually said that I was interviewing him to my family. And my 4-year-old said, "Oh, from Play School."
Oh, wow.
Because he's on Play School. So she knows more about him than I do. But I'm so looking forward to reading his book.
Yeah.
And I'm so looking forward to sitting down with him. And if anyone out there has any questions you'd like me to ask Dr. Karl, I'm all ears.
You know what else we should mention before we wrap it up?
What?
Larissa Moore is heading off on parental leave.
She is. So she's been doing quite a bit of filling in on this podcast and other podcasts, and we won't be hearing from her for a little while.
For a little bit. Yeah, we'll miss her around the office. We always do. This is baby number 3. So good luck to her and all of them.
All the best to you, Larissa. We love you dearly, and we'll have you back whenever you're ready.
Yeah, dial in for a podcast. We're here for you.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for listening to this episode of Weekly Wrap, and we will chat to you next week.